Mom gave me this. She told me to let you read it when you're all alone.
My 8-year-old granddaughter offered me a small booklet, the size of her hand. My daughter collapsed suddenly a week ago and remains bedridden and has not woken up. The doctors say that the symptoms are unexplained and there is nothing they can do.
Mom told me yesterday. She said it had been hidden under the bed in our house.
My granddaughter, who has had a mysterious power since she was a little girl, sometimes uttered unexpected words. And those words were definitely true. I immediately checked the contents of my daughter's booklet. No way. Then, I found a horrifying story that made my hair stand on end. My name is Ari and I am 65 years old. I have lived alone since my husband passed away 15 years ago, but I have never felt lonely. This was because my daughter and her husband and granddaughter live in an apartment 10 minutes away from my house by car, and I saw them often. Cindy and her husband Dan are both 37 years old. They are both nurses working at the same hospital and got married 10 years ago after an office romance. 2 years later, their granddaughter Anne was born, and she had a strange power that most people do not have.
Anne has a special power that is different from other children.
The daughter who said this told me that my granddaughter could hear voices that no normal person should be able to hear. I did not want to doubt my daughter, but I could not easily believe something unscientific. At first, I thought it must have been just a coincidence or a misunderstanding on my daughter's part. It was when my granddaughter was 5 years old that I witnessed its power. It was when I went with her to visit the grave of my husband who had passed away in an accident. As I was offering my husband's favorite roses, my granddaughter said, "That's not right." She shook her head.
Grandpa wants to see carnations.
My husband loved carnations as much as roses before he died, but I had never mentioned it to my granddaughter. I froze for a moment in surprise. "Oh, and who told you what Grandpa's favorite flower was?"
Grandpa just told me that he's not in the mood for roses today.
She pointed to my husband's grave, and I stared at her in amazement. At the time I was still half convinced of my granddaughter's power, but then something happened a short time later that forced me to believe in her power. It happened when I went to the supermarket with my daughter and granddaughter. As we passed by a pregnant woman shopping, my granddaughter suddenly turned around and shouted loudly,
"Wait! Your baby is in pain and crying. Go to the hospital right away."
My granddaughter stopped by our neighbor, a woman who was also familiar with my daughter. She was standing there with a blank look on her face, and my granddaughter pleaded with her to hurry. Then, the daughter rushed to them and said,
"Thinking you've been tricked, will you go to the hospital with me now?"
and started rushing her. I thought she was going to scold my granddaughter for saying something outrageous, but I could not hide my surprise. "Hey Cindy, don't you think you're overreacting?"
No, it's not, because if Anne is pleading so hard, there's definitely something going on.
Then my daughter took some time and somehow convinced the woman. When they went with her to her OB/GYN clinic, they discovered that the umbilical cord was entangled in the baby's neck. The woman had to have an emergency C-section and was able to deliver the baby safely. If she had left it alone, the baby's life would have been in danger, and she and her family were very grateful for my granddaughter. Since then, I have come to believe in Anne's magical powers. However, my daughter asked me to keep this a family secret and I did not tell anyone. And that mysterious power would later cause a terrible tragedy. It all started one fine holiday. It was when my daughter came to visit my house with my granddaughter.
I brought cookies for you.
Wow, thank you. Are they by any chance homemade?
I made them with my mom. Hey, Mom.
My granddaughter asked, smiling, but my daughter did not respond. And looked up at Cindy, who did not respond, with a curious look on her face, and asked again,
Mom?
She looked up at Cindy again with a curious look on her face and replied,
Yes, I guess so.
She replied. I wondered what was wrong with her. It was not like Cindy. I felt uncomfortable that my daughter, who usually expresses her love for her child to the best of her ability, was being so curt with her. She continued to act strangely after that, and no matter what I tried to say to her, all she would say was, well, or yeah, as if she was not in the right place at all. I sensed that something was wrong with my daughter. I asked her, Hey, are you okay? If you have any problems or concerns, just tell me. My daughter seemed lost for a while, but then she opened her mouth with a troubled look on her face.
Actually, Dan and I had a fight.
It was the night before that day. My son-in-law, who had seen a program about a child with psychic powers, suddenly said,
Let's use Anne's powers to make money.
The daughter said,
If she has this power, she'll pull out the TV. If she has this power, she'll be all over TV. He's all excited about how he's going to become a billionaire.
Hearing my daughter sigh in exasperation as she spoke, I frowned. It was obvious that if I did that, my granddaughter would be exposed to the world, and I couldn't very well agree to that. Treating Anne like a money-making tool is absolutely wrong. My daughter nodded her head and said, I understand, as I strongly pleaded with her. She thought it was up to Anne herself to decide when she was older whether or not she wanted to make her magical powers known to the public. I agreed with her and was relieved that Cindy had some common sense in her thinking. Have you told Dan how you feel?
Yes, but he didn't seem too convinced.
She really still wanted to discuss it, but her granddaughter, who had been sleeping, woke up and the conversation became moot. I was even angry at my son-in-law, but my daughter said she would not question him any further now.
We were just talking the other day about how we want to build a house soon, and I think he's just temporarily feeling more comfortable with money.
My daughter defends Dan by saying so. If Cindy, his wife, is like that, it is not for me to say. I decided to trust my daughter's judgment that my son-in-law's comment was a temporary distraction. A few days later, something unforgivable happened that I could not think of in that way. That day I was at a big park with my daughter, her husband, and my granddaughter. I was concerned about my son-in-law, but I was relieved that it was an unnecessary worry, as both my granddaughter and daughter were treating each other as usual and enjoying themselves as a family. However, that was a big mistake. The moment my daughter left my granddaughter's side to go to the bathroom, my son-in-law took her to the square where there was a street performance. As I followed him, wondering what was going on, my son-in-law suddenly picked up my granddaughter in his arms and lifted her as high as he could. Then, he took an extraordinary action.
This kid has a mysterious power. She can hear the baby in her mother's belly.
Showing and held up high to the people around her, the son-in-law shouted out loud while moving in a circle around her. I was so surprised that my son-in-law started to do something so strange that I froze for a moment, but I immediately grabbed his arm to stop him. Hey! Stop it!
It's none of your business. Don't interrupt me.
He didn't listen at all and shook my hand off.
This kid is the child of God.
He raised his voice even higher. Families and elderly couples walking in the park were glancing at us as if they were looking at something strange. I was rapidly becoming impatient, and just as I was about to do something to stop them, my daughter came dashing back when she heard my son-in-law yelling.
What are you doing? Put it down right now.
My daughter stormed at my son-in-law with great force. Overwhelmed by Cindy's anger, the son-in-law reluctantly put down his granddaughter. My granddaughter, who had been held in his arms forcibly and roughly pushed around, was on the verge of tears.
Anne, are you okay?
That was scary.
My daughter stared at my son-in-law with a stern face as she hugged my granddaughter with tears filling her eyes. However, my son-in-law turned away and pretended not to know. Cindy knew she couldn't go on like this, and when and calmed down, she said,
I'll talk to him for a minute.
And left the place. While we were waiting for them, my granddaughter and I decided to go to a place with a lot of playground equipment and play. At first, my granddaughter still looked a little frightened, but as we played together, she regained her energy, which was a relief. A short time later, it was only my daughter who returned to us. She told me that her son-in-law had left sulking after an argument with Cindy. While I was listening to her story, I noticed a fresh scrape on my daughter's elbow. What happened to that injury?
Actually, Dan got mad and pushed me.
Really? Are you okay?
I'm fine, and we'll talk about Anne when we get home, so don't worry.
I told my granddaughter not to worry. Dad went to work suddenly. After that, just the three of us played together until the sun went down. To be honest, I was full of anxiety. I wanted to call my son-in-law and say something to him, but I thought he would feel bad if I, his mother-in-law, spoke out of turn, so I decided not to say anything. A few days later, I received a sudden call from my son-in-law. Shockingly, he informed me that our daughter had collapsed and was unconscious. She was perfectly fine when we last met. Why? Our daughter had been transported to the hospital where Dan worked, and I hurried there. Despite various tests, the cause of her collapse remained unknown, and she continued to sleep without waking up. I visited her every day, and during one of those visits, I encountered my son-in-law, who had been checking on our daughter's condition between work hours. I had taken comfort in the fact that he cared about our daughter even after our arguments, but later, I would discover that this was a significant misunderstanding. A week after our daughter collapsed, a significant event occurred. Our granddaughter, who had been visiting with us during our daughter's hospital stay, discreetly handed me a booklet.
Grandma, take a look at this.
She whispered. She glanced around, ensuring no one was nearby, and seemed quite cautious. What's this?
It's from Mom. She said you should read it when you're alone.
Our granddaughter explained. But when did she give this to you?
Yesterday. Mom told me it's hidden under the bed at home.
Yesterday, our daughter was already in a coma. Our granddaughter claimed she heard Cindy's voice using her mysterious ability. Perhaps it's akin to a sixth sense. As soon as I picked up the booklet, I felt a shiver run down my spine. No way. Fearfully, I opened the booklet and found something terrible written in it. Immediately, I became suspicious of my daughter's sudden collapse, and examined her body, which was still asleep. I looked at her head, face, and body in order, but there was nothing unusual. However, just to be sure, I took off her underwear and found something extraordinary. Unable to stand still, I immediately went to my daughter's house with Anne. We entered the house with my granddaughter's duplicate key and decided to thoroughly inspect the inside. I noticed a laptop computer on a desk in the corner of the living room. Curious, I decided to take a look at it, but it was locked.
Grandma, look behind the desk.
My granddaughter said to me as I was at a loss. I looked behind the desk as she told me, and found a piece of paper with a PIN number written on it. A few days earlier, she had dropped her pencil under the desk while doing her homework and found the paper by accident. I can't believe he keeps track of his passwords this way. My son-in-law must have changed his password so often that he could not remember it himself. So much so that there is something in here that should not be seen by others. Fearfully, I typed in the numbers on the paper, and the computer started up. As I carefully looked at its contents one by one, I discovered something unimaginable in a file at the edge of the screen. Oh no! What is this? The moment I saw it, I made up my mind that I would definitely grab the tail of the culprit who put my daughter in that state. And after executing one of my plans, I arranged for Cindy to be transferred to another hospital. Then that night, my son-in-law came over to my house in a great hurry.
Why did you transfer Cindy to another hospital?
He was so angry that he shouted at the top of his lungs, not caring about the neighbor's eyes even though he was on our doorstep. I thought it was the right thing to do, so I discussed it with her doctor and decided to do it. When I replied nonchalantly, his son-in-law raised his voice.
Don't do anything selfish.
My son-in-law raised his voice.
I brought her all the way to the hospital where I work because I wanted to be close by and talk to her every day.
The son-in-law lowered his eyebrows in an exaggerated manner and mumbled with a look that said he was worried about his daughter. I was so disgusted by his expression that I couldn't contain myself and stormed over to him the next moment. No way! You tried to send Cindy to the other side of the world.
What? What are you talking about all of a sudden?
After a moment of wide-eyed impatience, I silently offered something to my son-in-law, who immediately turned red and became angry. It was my daughter's booklet that I had secretly received from my granddaughter. The first part of the diary was a bland one, but after a certain day, it became all about my son-in-law. Just from the day you said you wanted to use and as a money-making tool. The daughter's diary said,
Dan has been acting strange since we had the fight about Anne. He has become unfriendly and cold. Dan seems to be sneaking around on the computer looking up things. I can't help but feel uneasy.
This is just a small part of the story, but I could see how my daughter was growing more anxious and distressed as the days went by. When I think of Cindy at this time, it is heartbreaking. However, in direct contrast to me, my son-in-law expressed his displeasure.
I didn't behave that way. It's just my wife's self-serving assumption.
The son-in-law looked annoyed and said, but such an excuse would not work. But such an excuse was not going to cut it, because on a page further down in the booklet something terrible was written. Then what do you mean by this sentence? Something like a syringe needle had fallen out, then I questioned him about it. He acted suspiciously.
The
son-in-law clearly looks upset. I read this section of the booklet and knew I had to do a thorough search of my daughter's house. And as a result, I found something extraordinary. What is this thing I found in your room? I confronted my son-in-law with a notebook with the word plan written on the cover. This notebook was filled with instructions on how to send my daughter to the other side of the world. When I showed it to my son-in-law, he broke out in a sweat on his forehead and said in a hoarse voice,
"That's not mine."
He shouted at the top of his voice. It was obvious that he was in a great hurry, and no matter how much he denied it, it sounded like he was saying, "It's mine."
Why would I want Cindy gone?
Oh my God, why?
I love her, and there would be no reason for me to do that in the first place.
It was obvious that what he was saying was a lie. Because he had more than enough reasons to want to bury my daughter. I had heard from my granddaughter that they had had a rather heated marital argument shortly before Cindy's collapse. They were at odds over N's mysterious powers, no matter how many times my daughter tried to convince my son-in-law.
I'm going to use N as a tool of my business and become a millionaire.
And he did not listen to her. She was against it and would never break, so you decided to take her in your hands, didn't you?
And made up that story on her own. I bet she made up that plan as a prank too.
How could an 8-year-old kid plan something like this? Besides, I found syringe marks on Cindy's body. How are you going to explain this? When I examined every inch of my daughter's body as she lay in her hospital room, I found something extraordinary. It was the injection marks. What's more, that's not all I found. When I found the computer at my daughter's house, I checked his online purchase history and found evidence of large quantities of nuts, chemicals, and syringes. Those nuts are used as a spice in cooking, but in large doses they can cause drowsiness. My son-in-law mixed a large amount of it in her food, put my daughter to sleep, and had her rushed to the hospital where he worked. Since it was the hospital where he worked, it was easy for him to secretly falsify the results of various tests. Since his daughter and son-in-law have the same blood type, he exchanged Cindy's blood with his own that he had originally prepared. In this way, after hospitalizing his daughter, he kept putting her to sleep with this and that, and tried to extinguish Cindy's life by injecting drugs little by little with a syringe. All these plans were written down in the notebook.
I don't know anything. Please don't make me the bad guy when you have no proof that the notebook is mine.
He was still trying to keep his mouth shut at this point, but we still had a trump card left. Well, I'll show you the definitive proof. As soon as I played back the recording, his face turned blue and his stubborn attitude turned into a panic.
Oh my God. Why is this thing on there?
I showed my son-in-law a video that showed him in the hospital room putting something into my daughter's IV. Upon seeing the booklet and the plan, I was convinced that my son-in-law was trying to make Cindy disappear, and I immediately set up a small hidden camera in my daughter's hospital room. I made that footage available to my phone in real time and checked the video every 10 minutes. Then, a few hours after setting up the camera, I was able to record the decisive moment.
This was just the injection of a drug that the doctor had ordered.
There is no use in telling such a lie. Immediately after I saw this video, I asked the doctor to retrieve the IV and analyze the ingredients inside. As a result, I found out that it was mixed with a dangerous chemical that the hospital did not have. Then, having perfectly caught my son-in-law at the scene of the crime, I immediately transferred Cindy to a different hospital. Now there will be no more excuses.
Damn. I shouldn't have injected her IV just because it was too much trouble to take off her clothes.
Throwing himself down, the son-in-law spat that out, then scratched his head and kicked the front door with all his might. You mean to say that you admit that you did all this?
Oh, no, no. It's wrong. Not at all.
Although he became impatient at his own careless remark, He could think of no excuse and just kept repeating the same words. However, no matter how much he tries to talk his way out of it now, it is futile. I have already filed a damage report and submitted these evidences to the police, so an investigation should have started by now. You will be arrested soon. The son-in-law, with a look of despair on his face as he realized that there was nothing left for him to do, made a series of exaggerated apologies to show for it.
Please forgive me. How can I make it right for you to forgive me?
I looked down at him with cold eyes, having no intention of forgiving him when he did that.
I won't use it as a business tool anymore, and I will take good care of Cindy too. Please withdraw the damage report.
Even after saying this, my son-in-law kept making excuses, apologizing, and jumbled up his words. However, none of his words touched my heart, and on the contrary, only my discomfort grew. You're depressing me, so I want you to leave. I coldly pushed away my son-in-law who was clinging to me, and his face looked as if it was the end of the world.
Wait.
I pushed him, who was still trying to say something, out of the doorway, and with my arms full of disgust for him, I vigorously closed the door. Shortly thereafter, my son-in-law was arrested and Cindy and he divorced. My daughter has retained an attorney and is suing him for a total of $70,000 in alimony and child support. What he did was deemed so malicious that he will not be able to come out from behind bars for a while. My daughter woke up soon after being transferred to the new hospital, and she recovered quickly and is now completely healthy. Now I live with my granddaughter and the three of us live together in peace.
What did you think of this story? Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.